This is a Yashica Electro 35, a film camera from the 1960s. I like it. It's got that sort of child's drawing of a camera aesthetic, and in a different life, I was quite the camera enthusiast. Not a very good or engaged photographer, I just found the mechanical analog hardware to be, fascinating. I picked up this camera in Japan, and doing some Googling, I knew the first barrier to actually taking some photos with it was going to be finding a battery for it. The Yashica Electro 35 needs power to operate. It has an electronic shutter. If there's no power, there's no shutter speed control. In the 60s, it would have used this battery, an HA4N, filled to the brim with delicious, delicious mercury. I'm not sure why they stopped making them. Anyway, the 5.4 volts of the HA4N is very close to the 6 volts you get by stacking up 4 LR44 cells, which are the standard button cell batteries you find in all sorts of cheap electronics today. So I got an adapter on Amazon, and now we get to find out if this camera actually does anything when power is applied. And yeah, it sort of did something, but after messing about for half an hour, I came to the conclusion it is actually broken and is going to need to be repaired.
So I dove straight into the repair of this, and I'm filming this after the rest of the video. So yeah, please ignore the little yellow piece up here. You'll see what that's all about later on. But now we've got some power in this thing. You've got a little battery check button here, and if we press that, we do get some signs of life. This little window here that tells you how many exposures you've got left lights up. However, and this is the problem I was seeing initially, the camera's exposure system doesn't really seem to be working. This camera uses aperture priority exposure. You can set the aperture on this little ring up here, and the camera will electronically select the shutter speed that it needs. However, the only indicator I can get to go off is this light that says slow. So what does that mean? These two lights indicate whether or not the camera is able to take the correct exposure. If there's enough light in the scene to expose the film correctly, neither of these lights will light up. However, there's two conditions whereby the camera won't be able to expose correctly. It could be slow, which means there is not enough light. The camera's shutter speed isn't able to go slow enough to get the exposure you want. Over would indicate that if you do take the picture, you're going to overexpose. I find these two little lamps quite confusing with their names. You've got slow and over, which is sort of mixing metaphors. If you're going to call this one slow, then you want to sort of call this one fast. The camera isn't able to go slow enough, or it's not able to go fast enough. Or if you want to call this one over, then you want to call this one under. If this one lights up, it's going to underexpose the picture, and if this one lights up, it's going to overexpose the picture. So yeah, sort of mixing metaphors. It's not the best thing, but hey, I didn't design this camera. I wasn't alive in the 70s. The way the camera knows how much light is in front of it is through this little window here. This is all of the rangefinder mechanism for framing the photo and setting your focus correctly. But this little window here has got behind it a little light dependent resistor. You can see it's sort of closed in at the moment, but that's all to do with this little ASA dial. So if we set this ASA to ridiculously fast, you can see these little shutters open up. Yeah, and behind there, you should be able to see something that looks very similar to a modern light-dependent resistor. So an electrical component that changes its resistance depending on how much light lands on it. Having already started editing this video, I refer to this thing as a light-dependent resistor, a photocell, a whole bunch of other different things. But this was my first suspicion that this photocell simply wasn't in circuit. So, as far as the camera was concerned, there was no light hitting this thing at all. And we'll see if we can find evidence of that as we move on to further disassembly.
I am always glad at the excuse to get a brand new tool, and I believe this is called a pin spanner. I just grabbed one on Amazon, and you use it for taking apart old cameras. You see this sort of fixing a lot on old cameras, just a little circular plate with two holes in it, and that's exactly the kind of thing a pin spanner is designed to engage with and grip. You can see I'm just using one pin here to get this tiny little one off around the ASA dial. Once you've got the screw out the top, you can then just lift all the other parts out, and there you go. They're no longer fouling on the main body of the camera. The thing we're trying to actually remove here is this whole, you know, silver metal piece on top of the camera that goes across the whole thing, and we need to get these components out the way first. So we unscrew some bits, pull the stack apart, there we go, and they're no longer in the way. The last thing to come off is the film rewind lever. I just sort of bound that up from the underside and it just unscrewed all by itself. The last thing to do is just undo a couple of little Phillips screws that were just holding the case on. The fastener of last resort. And with the last one of those out, we start to see some movement. There you go. The whole thing lifts up. Look at that. It is still connected by a wire. This is for the flash sync, and I had to get my soldering iron out, and you know, I just did this exactly how the professionals do it. Textbook. So I got to poking around inside a little bit and sort of seeing what I could see. Oh, there you get a much better look at that sort of light dependent resistor through the little shutters there. Isn't that little shutter mechanism just fantastic? This is why I like old cameras. Just look at that. Two little, you know, flat pieces of metal with a keyhole in that index together to create a shape. It's brilliant. I love it. We'll see that name there, Copal, on the back there. You saw that a lot in old cameras. Copal specifically made shutter mechanisms. So while there was no, you know, I don't think Copal actually made a camera of their own. There were Copal components in lots and lots of old cameras like this. I've been watching a lot of Wristwatch Revival lately, and that guy really gave me the fantastic videos. And that guy really gave me the confidence to sort of, you know, just take things apart slowly, keep the parts laid out nicely, have a good look at the screws and the brackets as you take them off, just to sort of familiarise yourself with them and where they came from. And you don't necessarily need some sort of, you know, complicated system to, you know, disassemble things and put them back. You just need to be careful and patient. So I'm just trying to get under here to see where that little light sensor is, to see if we can see a bit more of this circuitry. And we're almost there. Just got a few more pieces to take apart and... Whoa! Ah! Aha! See that? So the component right in the middle of the screen there, that sort of circular metal part with the number 2 and the letter E stamped on it, that is the back of our light dependent resistor, the part of the camera that, you know, responds to how bright the outside world is. And you can see it's broken. One of its legs has just sheared clean off at some part, probably, you know, decades ago. And that's great because that is a super easy repair to effect. We just got to get a bit of wire in there, get a soldering iron out, and we can restore the electrical connection between the light dependent resistor and the circuit board.
So yeah, if we just restore this signal from the photodiode into the brain, I guess this is probably the brain, which is mad. You've got what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 components on there. Oh, and a couple of capacitors, a couple of resistors, I don't know, bill of materials, 15 parts. And then you got this sort of, I think this is like a circuit board we might recognise, this brown piece. I think it's some sort of, you know, it's like a fiberglassy type material. But this, look, this is ceramic. This is the same as the little white piece we saw on the bottom. Very, very interesting. All right, we've sort of got somewhere with the disassembly, onto effecting a repair.
This now just took forever. I found a little piece of wire that sort of seemed like it would work, and I just needed to connect, you know, I just needed to bridge the gap where this little component off the back of this photo sensor had broken. Trying to get enough heat and enough flux and enough solder down into the kind of depths of the camera there. These macro lenses do make it all look very lovely, but this is tiny. It's, you know, very, very hard. You see the wire coming off there again. It's so small and it's so fiddly and it's so hard to see what you're doing, and it just took forever. But again, I'm trying to be a bit more zen about this whole thing, be a bit more patient. And eventually, on attempt 365, we got there. There we go. Enough heat, enough solder. And we've extended that connection off the back of the photosensor so we can then reassemble everything and then solder on the other end when we're close to finishing. And now it's time to get everything sort of reassembled. I need to get, you know, a whole bunch of stuff lined back up and sort of correctly in its correct position in order to test if the, you know, camera is now behaving differently after a little soldering job. I'm sort of new to all this. I've never been to camera repair school or any sort of repair school or any sort of school in general, really. I never went to university or anything. But I've always just had a real thing for reuse and repair. When something doesn't work, the first thing I will always try to do is take it apart and see if I can find a problem with it. I've repaired our fridge, repaired our dishwasher. You know, how hard can a vintage camera be? There you can just see soldering up that the other end of that connection. So that's our you know our splice complete. And then I was just able to attach the I was still running it off my benchtop power supply at this point before I'd actually got the battery adapter. Then I realised that I'd actually broken another little connection off and I was going to get the soldering iron back out again. Now this clip did originally have some audio on it, but I'm not sure if it was just too late at night or if I was drunk, but probably both. It didn't really make any sense. So at this point I was able to confirm that my little solder job, adding a little piece of wire back into a broken component, had done something. This camera was now showing over in, you know, certain, the little red lamp that says over on it was now illuminating in, you know, a situation where you'd expect to see an overexposed scene. So we'd done something. The shutter was also making the appropriate sounds you'd expect to hear. So when the overexposed lamp was lit, you'd hear a very quick shutter speed, clunk. And then when the slow lamp was lit, is that what it says? Yeah, slow, then you'd hear a clunk, clunk for a much slower shutter speed, a much longer time between the shutter opening and closing. So I'm pretty confident we've got this doing something. It definitely appears to give you the two indications that you'd expect to see to help you, you know, correctly expose an exposure. So we're going to reassemble this whole thing. There is one problem with this camera that you might have noticed that well, we're going to run a roll of film through it first. This camera has lens mold. In old cameras like this, especially ones that have been kept in sort of, you know, damp or moist conditions, they can develop a mold on the inside of the camera's lens, and this camera does have that. Look carefully down the lens when you're next to one of those beauty shots. So that is a problem. If I'm going to restore this thing properly, you know, this cheap camera, what I'd really hope to do is to get the whole lens apart and then, you know, actually clean the mold off the lens. Before I commit to that, I just want to see how well this thing works. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a roll of film through it and see how the pictures come out. And that's sort of it, really. That's all I've got to say on the Electro 35. Disassembling it and reassembling it was a joy. I just really enjoyed it. It was just a lovely evening sat at the bench with my tweezers and my pin spanner, just sort of getting everything taken apart. It was amazing to realise that the leg of that resistor, that sensor was just broken. That was great. And it was all coming together nicely. Everything was just getting finished up, and suddenly my heavy-handed tendencies came out. Oh, did you notice that? I've broken it. We were doing so well. So yeah, I snapped it clean off. The last piece that I was screwing in to kind of call this thing reassembled, and I broke it, leaving the little threaded portion of the kind of screw there inside the camera. Luckily, this was able just to be backed out just by unscrewing it. Anyone's ever had to deal with a snapped screw in a hole knows that if it doesn't actually just spin, if it can't be unscrewed normally, then you're basically hosed. That part's scrap.
Ooh, check it out. M2.5 fits right in. I was genuinely fretting that I don't know, maybe America had more influence on post-war Japan and they were using strange imperial screws or something. But no, that is an M2.5 thread. So we can go ahead and make up a little 3D printed button to retain our film advance lever. Let's take some measurements. say 4mm, and the diameter is, right, 14.28. To the computer.
This is Fusion 360, my preferred 3D CAD software of choice. I mean, it's not really preferred. They make it harder and harder to get the hobbyist license every year. But it's the one that I know the best. So I'm just taking those couple of measurements that I made, adding a couple of, curvy lines and fillets and stuff just to make it slightly more appealing. And voila, we have a little button that can retain our film advance lever with the help of that little screw we found. Just need to slice this up, walk it over to the printer, and I don't really trust my printers lately, so we'll see how we get on.
All right, do we have anything? We do. Fantastic. And through the magic of 3D printing, there we do, a little button there. That's great. Okay, that seats inside the little thing there. Okay. Et voila. There we go. That kind of looks cool, doesn't it? Magic. All right. I quite like it. Right, let's work out how to power this thing up so we can run a roll of film through it, see how bad this lens mold is.
Thanks so much for hanging out, if you have been. Hopefully this has been useful, informative, maybe even hopefully somewhat entertaining. I'm going to pop a roll of film through this Yashica Electro 35 and I'm going to report back. Maybe we'll need to get it open and clean that lens mold out. All right, see you later. Bye.